I can tell you that the property is in good hands because there's a lot of folks probably in this room and also involved that are very knowledgeable and probably a lot smarter than I am. So I think you guys are going to do a great job. So a little bit of background on myself really quickly. I am a wildlife biologist, and I co-own a company based out of Charlottesville that does basically natural resource management. We do forestry, wildlife habitat, environmental things, agriculture even, conservation agriculture, things like that. And I was put in touch with the school through Beatrice von Gontard, and so that was great, and I appreciate her linking us together and being able to work with the school on this neat scenario. So I'm just going to kind of go over the plan. Have most people seen the plan that I put together? Read through it? Some people haven't. Some people may have. Okay. So what we essentially did was wrote a natural resource management plan based on what the school wanted. And I'll get into that in just a second. So bear with me. I'll be moving back and forth. Background to get kind of cranking here. I think most people know about the Conservancy, but approximately 46 acres. It was given to the school, 2 years ago, I believe, and has been placed in a permanent conservation easement with Clark County, so there are some restrictions on use. It was historically used for livestock grazing, and Jeff was sharing with me some recollections of some folks that actually remember it, when they were cattle grazing it. And best I can tell from looking at some of the vegetation, there are probably several series of farm abandonment time periods, but a lot of it was abandoned about 10 to 15 years ago based on some of the vegetation that's starting to come back. So the land's had a lot of time to kind of go wild, so to speak. One of the first things that we do when we create a plan is we have to know the objectives of the landowner. And that gives us a starting point and how we start to formulate our recommendations and baseline data from there. So these are some of the objectives that were told to me for the school, for the Conservancy. So preserve and enhance the ecological diversity, provide good stewardship of the land, a land ethic, as Otto Leopold would say, and also to provide an educational experience as well as some recreational possibilities for the children of the school. So those were the objectives that we started working with. The plan is kind of the first step in that whole process to seeing those objectives through. And this is going to provide a blueprint, a reference point that we can go back to and look at, kind of set the stage and gives you a roadmap for the future. And the purpose of it is to promote not only short-term management practices, but also a long-term vision of the sustainability of the land. Like I said a second ago, also establishes some baseline data. This is kind of where we started. This is what we saw, and you can change and make alterations to the plan as you go. And again, it's all based on the objectives of the landowner. So this was a little map that we put together. The map over there is fantastic, and I love all the kids' ideas. But this was just kind of a map of what we found on the property and what the broad classifications of land cover types that they're looking at. It might be a little bit hard to read on the screen here, so I'll kind of step through this a little bit. The red is the boundary lines of the Conservancy and the school. The golf course is over here for reference. The blue line streams are actually county stream data. So the large portion running through here is Roseville Run. Page Brook comes in here, and when they meet, they form essentially Spout Run. The green area that runs along with the stream is what we're calling a lowland riparian forest buffer as a forest type. This section over here that you can see in kind of the blue and white is a wetland, and I'll get into all of these in more detail in just a little bit. And I included that going off the property because that's kind of important. The wetland is about half on Powhatan School property and half on the adjoining landowner, who is these folks up here. This brownish color here is more of a mature forest. It's just a little bit different structure and age to it. And then there's kind of a neat feature over here, a little bit of a rock outcrop. It's actually a whole other kind of soil classification. The bulk of the property is what I'm calling old field, and that's essentially an old cattle, grazing pasture that's been allowed to go wild, and you get some of your typical early successional plants in there. Again, I'll go into that in detail. And another neat feature I saw was this fence row that goes right through here. You can see that pretty clearly on the aerial photo. And it's just kind of a neat little quasi-ecosystem. There's a whole different set of trees that grow along it, and they're a little bit older. It was just kind of a neat feature. For those who are more topographically inclined, this is kind of the same map overlaid on the USGS topo map. You can see that there's it kind of gently slopes down. There's an area, a nice draw over here on this side that runs up through that more mature forest. Drops down into a fairly broad bottomland area where that riparian forest is. All right, so the three broad land cover types that we identified were the upland mixed hardwood, which was that brown area, the old field, kind of that tannish area on the map, and then that lowland riparian forest buffer. So the upland mixed hardwood stand was only about 9 acres. We're estimating it's probably between 40 and 60 years old, but I'm sure there's quite a bit of variability in there with different species. A lot of black walnut, sycamore, ash, some locust, a few honey locusts scattered in there, a little bit of pine, and one big oak, which was kind of a neat feature as well. The understory is pretty choked with invasive species. And I'll talk a little bit more about invasive species in a minute, but there's a lot of, most of you maybe tried to walk through there. It's a jungle. A lot of oriental bittersweet, buckthorn, bush honeysuckle. So what that is doing is it's limiting the natural regeneration of some of our native trees, like the walnut and the oaks. And so that's a little bit of a problem. And then that interesting feature up there at the top of the property there with that rock outcrop.
Can I hit it for you?
Sure. Well, get it. Next up, the lowland riparian forest buffer is about 7 acres, and again, it's probably in that same age range, a little bit more mature trees. Again, there's a lot of variability. A lot of sycamore, some box elder, black walnut. There's a few big cottonwoods further out on the edge near the parking lot, which are kind of neat, and a lot of the Osage orange. This area, it is protected in the sense that the stream isn't wide open, cattle aren't in it, and there's not there's some bank stabilization, some vegetation holding it, but a lot of the species in there, especially in the understory, are invasive plants. Chinese privet, this Dihernian buckthorn, which is a new invasive plant for me. I hadn't experienced it until I started working up in this area, and I understand there's quite a bit, maybe a glandy, and there's another property that I was visiting today that I noticed a lot of it. So that may be a pretty significant invasive plant up in this part of the state. Some bittersweet, garlic mustard. And I know there's a lot of interest in the streams, and one thing I'm going to caution is that these riparian forest buffers are very important for stream health. They're corridors for lots of wildlife, and I would caution and think about activities that might happen in there and try and minimize a lot of the major disturbance if possible. But I know there's a lot of restoration work that's interested with the stream. So, moving right on into the streams. The two perennial streams, Roseville Run and Spout Run, Pagebrook comes in from right here and enters and forms Spout Run. Like I was mentioning, there's a lot of good vegetation cover there, even though some of the plants we might consider bad, invasives. Historically, when the cattle were grazing in there, they were coming right down to the stream. There are some erosion and stream bank issues. There's, this is a nice big section where it's just kind of cut where the stream goes through. I popped in and out looking in the stream, and I didn't do a big stream survey or anything, but there was very little aquatic life. It took me a while to find even little minnows swimming around through there. And So there's some problems with the stream that I think a lot of folks here already know and are interested in trying to fix. Some of the potential inputs coming off the golf course potentially, and some upstream sources. So those are some places that maybe you can look to work to strengthen a partnership along with the school. Now the wetland, this is a really interesting feature on the property, and as when I first saw it, I said this is cool, but I didn't really know how neat it was from an ecological standpoint. So I tried to classify it, and then I called in some help with the folks at Natural Heritage, and we came up and went through here and surveyed it, and sure enough, it's what we're calling a calcareous spring marsh and muckfen, which is a globally rare wetland type. It's characterized by a lot of this open, herbaceous vegetation. Most wetlands we encounter in Virginia tend to be forested systems, but this one's different. There's a big input from a spring, and a lot of the main characteristics of plants that are typical of this calcareous spring marsh are found right around that spring. And as you move out away from the spring source, the wetland starts to degrade and dry a little bit. And I found out today from Jeff that the cattle apparently were in this area wallowing, and it was kind of a disaster. And you can see some of that, but it's amazing that the wetland has persisted, and some of these plants still exist. Like I mentioned on the map before, it does cross the boundary. There's a fence right there that it was the boundary line onto another property. So any work that's done on the wetland, you're probably going to have to work with the neighbor, and hopefully they'll be on board, and you can do a larger restoration process. The other big
2 acres on Powhatan's property, or a total of 2 acres?
The wetland is total about 2 acres.
Okay, so
yeah.
about an acre.
Right. Yep. As you move out and it dries, there's a pretty heavy component, almost a monoculture of reed canary grass, which is a problem. I would consider that an invasive in this system, and that's probably left over from the cattle operation potentially, or came in from another source. But it is a forage type grass, and it likes its feet wet. So that's another restoration problem to deal with there. And I know it's high visibility, it's close, it's a globally rare system, so I would rank this high in a bullseye to target for potentially doing some restoration ideas in there.